The name of the game is presented by Bravo, the marketing arm of Ash Brokerage Corporation, the practice enhancement company. Welcome to Steve Savant's Money, the name of the game. Hi everyone, I'm your host, Steve Savant, syndicated financial columnist and money gamer extraordinaire. The graying of America is underway with baby boomers retiring every day. The life expectancy of seniors is expected to eclipse the previous generation by an entire decade. On today's show, we're featuring Social Security, the #1 retirement plan for most Americans. Social Security benefits were originally designed to be tax-free. For most Americans, most days are over. And here to talk about it, America's retirement plan, is Ken Davis, certified financial planner and CPA and syndicated financial columnist. Remember, it's your money. In the G segment, it's game on as we learn the history of the Social Security system. In the A segment, we'll outline some of the basic taxation on Social Security benefits. In the M segment, our money mentor, Ken Davis, will walk you through all your options. And in the E segment, we'll help you maximize your benefits and keep more of your own money. Hey, welcome to the show, Ken.
Hey, Steve, good to see you.
Well, we have Ken back again, and one of the reasons we have is not only because he's a CLU, a CHFC, a certified financial planner, and a CPA, but he also writes a lot, and I've seen a lot of your articles online, about Social Security. Now, of course, this is really becoming a mainstay topic for baby boomers now. We're all, 10,000 baby boomers, I think, something like or every day, day, a month, I don't know what it is. But really, it's really becoming an issue. And remember, Social Security, for most of Americans, is America's retirement plan.
Well, and let's remember the baby boom generation all the way through, from baby food and diapers initially to elementary schools, middle schools, high schools, college, whatever. We've been like the snake eating the small hog, going through this big lump through this timeline, and now this whole huge group of people are hitting that, which means that it's going to, have impacts on both the taxation of Social Security income. When you retire, your income will be taxed in most cases, and then also, the taxation along the way. So we're talking about how much income do you get and how do you increase that income. There are strategies to do that. You can add $50,000 to $200,000 in lifetime benefit, but that's not what we're going to be talking about today. We're going to be talking about the taxation of the income when you receive it.
Well, I remember back in the day, there was a period at the beginning where there was no taxation issues.
Well, that's right. I mean, it's interesting how governments introduce new programs. It's this incremental creep type of thing where, this is a minor tax. And initially, Social Security income tax was very small. And of course, it's ballooned over the years and the benefits have ballooned. And of course, people are living a whole lot longer. So the benefits have gotten more generous. It's included more and more people. People are living longer. And now we have this huge group of people coming in. It's going to really put a big burden on the system, and it's going to have to be dealt with.
Well, I noticed back in the 80s that they tried to do something with this. Ronald Reagan started introducing some way to recapture some of this through taxation, but there was no inflation.
Well, the actuaries are, and a lot of people don't know that term, but an actuary is basically a number cruncher that looks down the future, and they're like pension specialists. They look at, okay, here's the demographics, who's retiring, what their income's going to be, what inflation rates are, and they come up with these models to predict what's going to be needed. And I think as early as 1980, the Reagan administration, along with what was the Democratic Congress at the time, so this was really kind of a bipartisan effort, were focused to a certain degree, and they came to the conclusion, they said, this is just so burdensome, we're going to have to do something to bring some of this revenue back. Let's pick on the rich people. Let's start at the very highest levels, and where we haven't been taxing before, we're going to introduce this kind of low-level taxation of the really wealthy people. And that's where they started it, and they started it up to 50% of Social Security to be taxed.
Well, I noticed that back in the day, it used to be I contributed to my own Social Security. Then they brought the employer in. He had to match it. And of course, if you were self-employed, you had to do both sides of that equation. So people have their own business. I mean, think about it. They're paying what? 15% right now.
Well,
plus.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's a big number.
Well, that's true, and of course the government, again, it's interesting to watch how they skirt the issue. They don't want to say to the American worker, you're paying 15%. The employer is going to pay it. Well, guess what? Is the employer still going to be able to pay the same salaries that they were before and now pay this extra 7+% tax? No, it's going to impact their salaries, and they don't recognize it, they don't see it. It's very kind of surreptitious and indirect, and that's unfortunately where the government's gone with a lot of our laws. And as we talk about the show today, we'll see where they've inserted those little games that they play and hide it from all of us.
Well, shockingly, remember, there is really not a promise to the American people on this. I really don't think there is a separate side fund that they quarantine the Social Security. And think about the last part. What happens if we need more revenue? How high can this go? One of those tiers, Ken, could be almost an exposure of 85% of your actual benefit.
You know, what's interesting is, yes, you're right, there is no fund, and it's almost like having a puppet on this hand and says, oh, here you go, I'm going to give you some money. And you go, okay, I'm going to put it in this pocket. And it's still the government, right? The one side of the government promising the other side of the government. It's absurd when you really look at what's going on. There are no stocks, there's no bonds, there's no real estate. There are no real investments in this portfolio. It's simply one part of the government lending to the other part of the government to pay its bills. It's absurd.
And there's a huge IOU right now, and right now I'm looking at some of the numbers that are titanic. If you go out to some of these watchdog sites, I'm not talking just about our $17 trillion US debt. I'm using a number that's almost 76 trillion that includes all the pension obligations and what we're talking today, of course, Social Security. So this is a big number.
Well, let's get back to that 85%. They started in 1980 with the 50%. Didn't look terribly bad. Rich people, only 50% of your income, Social Security income, is taxable. But it went up to 85%. And here's the key. There is no inflation adjustment. They put thresholds in there that you weren't taxed until you crossed that threshold. First for the 50%, then for the 85%. Well, those thresholds back then only affected the rich. Well, now with even modest amounts of inflation since 1980 till now is what, 33 years? Well, slowly but surely those thresholds become less and less meaningful as inflation rises. So the result is we have solidly the middle class is being taxable not only at 50%, but a whole lot of them at 85%, and I would say we're in the lower end of middle class. So this is not the rich tax that it was sold us to be. With this chipping away with the inflation, it really is impacting the broad group of Americans in retirement.
If you want more information on the basics of Social Security benefits for your retirement, just email me, steve.savant@ashbrokerage.com, and I'll email you our free Social Security Provisional Income Test to help you plan for your retirement income around your Social Security benefits. The test will take about 13 minutes. Is your retirement worth 13 minutes? I bet it is. When we come back from the break, Ken and I are going to walk you through the basics of engagement with Social Security in the A segment of our show. We'll be right back after the break.
Take a close look at your hard-earned dollar. How do you think your money's doing? Are you keeping an eye on it? Is it protected from taxes, inflation, and market risk? Over time, those Washingtons could become Franklins. With tax-advantaged indexed universal life from one of the largest distributors of indexed universal life, Ash Brokerage.
Welcome back to The Name of the Game. I'm Steve Savant with Ken Davis, financial columnist, certified financial planner, and CPA. And just a heads up, before moving forward with any of the ideas you hear on our show, always consult your tax advisor or legal counsel. Coming up in the A segment, Ken and I are going to walk you through some of the basic rules of engagement with Social Security. Well, Ken, we're in our second segment. We're talking about something that everybody has to do every year. We all have to file annual taxes. And people don't understand the connection between filing a 1040 form and your Social Security. And it's a big deal. Let's talk a little bit about, when we're looking at this, one of the things you like to really focus on is line 20B. Why is that so important?
Well, it's important because the law is so complex that if I rattled off the rules, you're going, what? You know, that doesn't compute.
It's convoluted.
It's crazy. I'm not going to pay any attention to it. Forget it. I can't do that. So we're going to make it really easy for everybody. Line 20B as in boy on the Form 1040 federal
First page.
Tax return. First page, line 20B. What 20B is the amount of a retiree's Social Security income that is currently being taxed. Okay? So if you're going to be doing this before you're retired, you're not going to know that number. You're going to have to go through some sort of process of calculation. But for those of you that are in retirement and want to know if you're being impacted by this, if it's worth listening to the show or not, or that you're close to it. You look at line 20B, and if there's a number on it, you're being taxed on your Social Security, and that's the portion that's being taxed. It's that simple.
Now, where's this money coming from? They do have a thing, I think you told me it's called the provisional income test.
Yeah, basically what happens is there is when you get into the instructions for the Form 1040, there's a separate calculation that takes place. And they start with adjusted gross income, which is the number on the bottom of the first page. And that's before Social Security's been put in yet, because you don't know what it's going to be. So it's one of those circular kinds of calculations. It's kind of hard to get your brain wrapped around. But basically, take AGI, you add back in a half.
And AGI is?
Adjusted gross income.
And that's the bottom one that's the bottom line on the first page of the 1040.
Yeah, and it's important to know the flow of a tax return. The first lines up above are gross income from various sources, from wages, from interest, from dividends, from rentals. All that stuff flows down the top. There's certain business-related deductions on the front page, like IRA deductions and stuff like that. And then you come up with this adjusted gross income. So it's gross income increased and decreased by certain items to get to AGI. AGI is then modified, and that's the term. I mean, it's crazy. Modified, adjusted.
So it's adjusted again.
Yeah, it's a secondary adjustment. Modified, adjusted gross income, which I like to tease them and say it's really magic. Magically, they take more money from us. Modified, adjusted gross income confiscation. Okay? So anyway, MAGI is AGI, bottom of the page, added to half of your Social Security income and municipal bond interest. And we're not going to dwell on it, but essentially your total gross capital gain. Not a reduced amount. The total gross capital gain is also included in that number. It doesn't have to be added in because it's already there.
Okay, well, when I think about capital gain, I think about I'm going to be paying maybe 15, 20% on my capital gain. It's a long investment. I'm looking at that number, and you're saying it's not the tax number that's being forwarded to the Social Security provisional income test. I think what I'm hearing you say is the entire gain is treated as income as it relates to Social Security taxation.
Right. For instance, if you had a $10,000 capital gain and you thought you're only going to pay 15% or 20% for the higher rate people, say 15%, that's $1,500. It isn't the $1,500 that flows through the front page, it's the full $10,000. So the 15% is applied on the second page. They break out the cap gain from the regular ordinary income. They apply an ordinary income tax rate and a cap gain rate and then add them together. Well, this basically takes capital gain and runs it through and subjects Social Security to be included to arrive at those numbers later on. This stuff gets complex, it's hard to follow, but...
It sounds like a trap. If I have seniors, if I'm hearing you correctly, if I have seniors taking constructive receipt of Social Security and they have investments where they're making they have a capital gain, they think in their mind, the only way I'm paying tax on that, and that's all it is, capital gain 15, 20%. But my Social Security now picks that up, and that's at ordinary income tax on Social Security, so it matters.
Well, yes, and I would like to give a tip to our viewers, and that is either employ a very competent CPA who can do tax projections and say, if I do this, what's the end result? Because there's no way anymore that in our brain we can say, oh, I'll just apply the 15% and I've got my number. No, you don't. There's other waves and ramifications to this whole process, and unless you run it through a piece of software, and even your CPA can't do this in their head. I've never met one that could. I can't believe that there are any. You have to run it through a piece of software. And then some of you that are do-it-yourselfers, your accountants, your retired engineers, stuff like that, who really like to do it yourself. I had a dad that was an engineer. He did this kind of stuff. You can go out and find programs and run it through yourself, but make sure you know what you're doing because it is complicated.
Well, when I think about the options, and there are huge options to look at, and there's strategies, we're going to get to that a little bit later in the show. I just want to know, make sure people understand, there are real factors that can really hit your impact. And what we're talking about right now in this segment is your 1040 line 20B. So if I see something on there, how do I go back and say, what's causing this?
Well, you just look at your income, that flows through, and we're going to be talking about strategies where you can change that so you can actually have an impact that reduces the taxation of Social Security. That's the hope.
Well, my hope is that if we look at the idea behind what's causing it on line 20B, we can backtrack and find out what is actually the consequence of our investments or whatever our income is, we can go ahead and take that number and see if we can do something about it. And in the fourth segment, we're going to really actually get into this whole thing. If you want more information on the basics of Social Security for your retirement, just email me, steve.savant@ashbrokerage.com, and I'll email you our free Social Security Provisional Income Test to help you plan for your retirement income around Social Security. The test will take about 13 minutes. Is your retirement worth 13 minutes? I bet it is. When we come back from the break, Ken and I are going to address the thresholds and formulas of your Social Security benefits in the M segment of our show. We'll be right back, right after the break.
Take a close look at your hard-earned dollar. How do you think your money's doing? Are you keeping an eye on it? Is it protected from taxes, inflation, and market risk? Over time, those Washingtons could become Franklins. With tax-advantaged indexed universal life from one of the largest distributors of indexed universal life, Ash Brokerage.
Well, welcome back to The Name of the Game. I'm Steve Savant with Ken Davis, financial columnist, certified financial planner, and CPA. And just a heads up, before moving forward with any of the ideas on our show, always consult your tax advisor or legal counsel. Coming up in the M segment, Ken and I are going to address some of the thresholds and formulas of your Social Security benefits in the M segment of our show. Well, Ken, we're talking in our third segment. We talked about AGI, adjusted gross income. I just want to get the nomenclature right.
Yeah.
And MAGI, right, this modified adjusted gross income, and how this actually formats Social Security, how it comes on Social Security's flow chart to see is it going to be taxed or not. And I want to ask you a question because you mentioned it earlier, and I think a lot of our viewers are going, wow, some tax exempt. I thought it was tax exempt. Why is that? That income actually flows onto my Social Security provisional test. Talk a little bit about that before we get into the main part of what we're going to talk about today.
Well, I think it's really, as a bit of a student of tax law and having been around it for many years, I find it very interesting. There was a point at which they got so much pushback from the public about raising tax rates that they found other ways to get taxes raised without it being easy to talk about in the news. I mean, how do you talk about what we just did? Adjusted gross income, modified adjusted gross income.
Right.
It effectively increases your tax rates. People go, their heads are spinning. So it never gets really talked about in the news. But it is happening. So what's happening is they're saying, everybody thinks, municipal bond interest is tax-free at the federal level. Well, the fact of the matter is really not, because they're using municipal bond interest goes into this provisional income formula to determine whether or not Social Security is taxed, Social Security income in retirement. And so my brain just leaps to simplify and says they're taxing municipal bond interest because it effectively causes Social Security to be taxed. It's really the muni bond interest that's being taxed.
Now, not all municipal bonds are subject to that, but that income still is an issue.
Yeah, that income is included in that calculation. It's adjusted gross income, bottom of page 1. Add half of your Social Security income onto that, then add your municipal bond interest in it. And we talked in length at the last segment that capital gains already included in there at its full value, not the diminished 15 or 20% tax rate, but at the full value. So all of that's there. It is so easy to cross the threshold now, this threshold that was designed to tax only rich people early on. 33 years later, without inflation adjustment on the thresholds, it's pretty much hitting everybody.
Well, talking about hitting everybody, I always thought all our tax codes were pretty much even-handed with all Americans, that we were being taxed equally. But I'm looking at this, Ken, in our area where you and I were born, it's a pretty wide swap. If you hold out to age 70, don't take your benefits at age 62, but if you hold out to age 70, we're getting 132% of the total amount, which is about 8% after age 66, which is our target full Social Security age. That becomes 8% compound till we get to age 70, and then it's 132%, and no other generation after that is getting that kind of number. It actually begins to decrease.
Yeah, now we're getting into a different area, but full retirement age, FRA, is based on birth dates and when you were born. And currently the baby boom generation falls into age 66. And the way the formula works to increase income is 8% simple, not compounded, each year for 4 years. So 4 times 8 is 32. So you get an extra 32% income at age 70. which is something that a lot of people don't know. The vast majority of people start at 62, which is a 25% discount, a reduction from full retirement age. Then people can go beyond full retirement age to age 70. They're missing out on a whole lot of income.
Right. Well, when I'm looking at these numbers, I mean, unbelievable. I guess we were born in the right time, because that's a huge number. And I guess I assume, Ken, everything was being applied equally.
Well, no, what's happening is this whole idea that, when Social Security was first put in place, it was 65. And it's awful to talk about, but people were pretty much dead. I mean, a lot of people were, it was like half on the other side of 65 and half before 65. People didn't live nearly as long as they do today. Well, with modern science and medical help and all that stuff, we're all living a whole lot longer. I mean, lots and lots of people are into their 80s and 90s now. And so instead of a few years of paying income to people, now we're talking about 20 and 30 years beyond 65 that this formula, they have to pay us this income. So they said, well, people are living longer, they can work longer. We need to start phasing out this full retirement age from 65. Well, right now it's 66 for our generation. In a number of years, it'll be 67, and then I think goes 68. So as those normal retirement age, full retirement age gets pushed out, they still get 8% a year, but there's not that many years to get the extra.
When you think about it, the number one issue in retirement, the number one risk in retirement, I thought it was the market. The number one risk today now is human longevity, living too long. And now we already have stress on the Social Security system. There's already kind of common thought out there that it may not last. Now we're actually compounding the problem and exacerbating it, because the baby boom generation may exceed the previous generation, the World War II and Korean, maybe by a decade.
Well, I think we should get used to the fact that pushing out these numbers is going to continue. There's a lot of different ways you're going to try and solve this problem of this huge burden on the system. I think it's pretty logical we're going to see this pushed out even further for the younger generations.
I could actually see in the future that age 70 could be the new marker for the millennial generation.
I think it's going to have to be at least that.
If you want more information on the basics of Social Security benefits for your retirement, just email me, steve.savant@ashbrokerage.com, and I'll email you our free Social Security Provisional Income Test to help you plan your retirement income around your Social Security benefits. The test will take about 13 minutes. Is your retirement worth 13 minutes? I bet it is. When we come back from the break, Ken and I are going to help you reduce the impact on your Social Security benefit taxation in the E segment of our show. We'll be right back after the break.
Take a close look at your hard-earned dollar. How do you think your money's doing? Are you keeping an eye on it? Is it protected from taxes, inflation, and market risk? Over time, those Washingtons could become Franklins. With tax-advantaged indexed universal life, from one of the largest distributors of indexed universal life, Ash Brokerage.
Welcome back to The Name of the Game. I'm Steve Savant with Ken Davis, financial columnist, certified financial planner, and CPA. And just a heads up, before moving forward with any of the ideas you ever hear on our show, always consult your tax advisor and legal counsel. Coming up in the E segment, Ken and I are going to help you reduce the impact on your Social Security benefit taxation in the E segment of our show. Well, Ken, we've talked about the dilemma. We've talked about the challenge. Now let's talk about some resolutions and some ideas to really help us keep more of our retirement money, because that's really the end game.
Well, basically, it used to be when we used to do tax planning, it was tax deductions. Okay, everybody wanted tax deductions. Well, in large part, all that's pretty much left is pension plans, retirement plans as a tax deduction. Yes, there's some other things we're not going to get into, but what is left for tax planners is tax deferral. And what's interesting is the products, the assets out there that can help you accumulate wealth, surprisingly fall into the camp of annuities and in some cases life insurance. And I know that is contrary to some people's thinking, but let's talk about annuities first. When you put money into an annuity, you don't get a deduction, and when it comes out it's taxable, but in between you get a tax advantage, and that is tax deferral.
Now, how long do I have to hold to make that an advantage, would you say, Ken?
Well, it depends upon your circumstances, but any time you can tax defer, the longer you can defer, the better it is.
The better it is.
Because it's sort of like going to the bank and saying, I want to borrow money at a zero cost interest.
Mm-hmm.
And Mr. Banker, I'm going to go invest this. And as long as I invest it, you don't charge me any interest. As soon as I take the money out of a wealth creating asset or income producing asset, then you're going to get your share of those deferred gains. Well, that's basically what the government's done, is they have loaned you your taxes, your money, not theirs, your money, to put into some sort of increased wealth asset or income asset. And as long as you let it build, you're fine. But as soon as you start to take it out, you're taxable. So that's how an annuity works.
Well, let's just make sure our listeners. So tax deferred is not tax exempt. Tax
That's
deferred
right.
is not tax free. It's just a delay of the inevitable.
That is correct.
But
And
that delay has power to it.
well, that delay is power. You're earning money on money you didn't have. And even though you have to pay taxes when it comes out, you're still ahead of the game. And I know some people don't quite get that, but work with their financial advisor, insurance agent, whatever, they can show them how that actually works.
So on deferral, I can see that, and there's all kinds of different techniques in this thing called combining annuities, maybe 5-year or 10-year or lifetime annuitizations. All these kind of tactics, using them in different periods and different durations, can actually help you in your tax issues.
Well, let's simplify this a little bit. Let's go back. Let's just say, basically what we're talking about is, you were talking about what caused the taxation in the first place. You could have CDs, money market funds, municipal bonds. These are all generating interest. And that interest flows through the tax return and affects whether or not your Social Security income is taxable. So the question is there anything you can do about that? Well, essentially, a balance sheet is just a listing of your assets and your liabilities, okay? So CDs, money market funds, mutual funds, all the stuff is up there, right? Well, we just simply are going to move or suggest clients move from the CDs or money market funds generating interest into deferred annuities, which are growing, which are building, may have a stated interest rate or some sort of formula interest rate that they're credited by, but those earnings aren't taxable. There is no 1099 at the end of the year. When they pull the money out, the deferred taxation is going to kick in, but for the time being, there isn't. So for those years that you have money building that you don't need the earnings, then you're not paying taxation of Social Security income, and you're not paying regular tax at that point in time.
Now, I've heard you talk about this before. You sometimes will take a cash value permanent life insurance contract that's been accumulating, and you'll use that because the actual withdrawals to basis and policy loans of gain can come out free as long as the contract's kept in force for the life of the insured.
All right, let's just back up real quickly. When money comes out of the annuity, it's fully taxable. There are ways to design a life insurance policy. Yes, it's going to have insurance. Yes, it has cost of insurance, but ultimately it can build cash value, tax deferred. But the difference between a life policy and an annuity is the money from the life policy, when you use certain strategies, can come out tax free. It's considered a return of your original investment, your tax basis, or the income can be borrowed against the contract. And I know borrowing is a bad term, but effectively you can borrow it at no cost.
Or
right?
low cost.
Or very low or no cost interest. And the result is you're able to build it tax deferred and then take it out tax free. And then the beauty of life insurance is at death, and I know we don't like to talk about death, but at death, all sins are forgiven. In other words, all of the deferred taxes become permanently deferred or tax free at death because death benefits come out tax free. So through return of your own money, it's tax free, and with the loans, those become tax-free. So there are ways of doing that. So what we do is, and this is where your financial advisor, your insurance agent work with you, is we put a combination of deferred annuities, income annuities, and life insurance products together to form a strategy to control cash flow, gives you cash flow that is much, much lower taxation, isn't included in your gross income, and therefore reduces the taxation of Social Security income.
Well, these are artful things that we're looking at. We're adding these on to some of the things like reverse mortgages that seniors look at. We're looking at different ways to actually optimize not only the products we use, but the timing on when we pay tax. Sounds like that timing is so critical that it can actually make an impact. And of course, we're trying to save our Social Security as much as we can. These could be ideas to do.
Well, these techniques work. They work really well, and with a competent advisor, you can get the job done.
Well, that's our show for today. I want to thank Ken Davis for being my special guest in today's Money Mentor. And remember, you can follow me on Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, or email me, steve.savant@ashbrokers.com. And don't forget, But the good Reverend John Wesley once said, make all you can, save all you can, give all you can. I'm Steve Savant. See you next week.